In 1810, a single pound of sugar cost an English labourer an entire day's wages, a full day, dawn to dark, for one small bag of white crystals. 90 years later, his great-grandchildren stirred it into their tea 3 times a day and never thought about it once. No commodity ever climbed so fast from luxury to necessity, and none left so many bodies behind it. But sugar did not begin in an English teacup or on a Caribbean plantation. It began in a jungle, roughly 8,000 years ago, on the island of New Guinea. Somewhere in that green heat, a man pulled a tall grass out of the wet ground and tore the fibrous stalk open with his teeth. He tasted something no human had ever tasted in that form before: pure, concentrated sweetness. He had no word for it. He could not have known that the same taste would one day be worth its weight in silver and paid for in human lives. This is how it travelled from his mouth to yours. For thousands of years, that was all sugar was, a stalk you chewed. People across New Guinea and the Pacific bit into raw cane for the juice, spat out the fibre, and moved on. There was no refining, no trade, no fortune in it. It spread slowly, island by island, carried in the canoes of Austronesian voyagers across an ocean the width of the planet. By perhaps 3,000 years ago, it reached the Indian subcontinent, and there, everything changed. Indian farmers did not just chew the cane. They crushed it between rollers, boiled the juice down, and watched the liquid harden into rough brown crystals a person could hold in the palm of a hand. They called it kanda. That word survives, 2,000 years and 8,000 miles later, as the English word candy. For the first time, sweetness could be dried, weighed, stored, and carried. It was no longer tied to the stalk or the season. Around the 4th century, under the Gupta emperors, Indian sugar makers turned the boiling into a craft. Physicians wrote about the crystals almost reverently and prescribed them as medicine. To much of the world, it was closer to a holy thing than a food. From India, the secret moved west with armies and monks. A Greek admiral under Alexander had already described the plant in wonder as a reed that gives honey without bees. Persian growers mastered it. When Arab expansion swept across the Mediterranean, it carried cane and the art of boiling it into Egypt, Sicily, and Spain. For everyone else, sugar stayed a rumour. When Europeans finally met it, they filed it beside pepper and cinnamon, a spice, not a food, something rare enough to hand a king as a gift. Consider one measure of that rarity. In 1226, Henry III of England wrote to the Mayor of Winchester with a single question: could 3 whole pounds of sugar be found at the Great Fair, if so much could be had at one time? Sit with that. A king, begging a city, unsure the country held 3 pounds of it. For almost its entire history, sugar was not a habit. It was a marvel, rarer than pepper, dearer than medicine, a taste kept for royalty. And underneath the wonder sat one hard fact that would prove fatal to millions. Cane grows only in wet tropical heat, and it devours labour. To make sweetness on a scale that could feed a continent, someone had to plant it, cut it, crush it, and boil it without stopping, in a climate that killed. Europe wanted the sugar. It did not want the work, so it went looking for people it could force to do it. That search ended in 1493. On his second voyage across the Atlantic, Christopher Columbus carried sugarcane cuttings from the Canary Islands to the island of Hispaniola. The plant loved the Caribbean. The very heat that made the work unbearable made the cane grow thick and fast. Within a century, the islands and the coast of Brazil had been remade into a single machine for turning green stalks into white crystals, and that machine ran on human beings. Across 300 years, roughly 12 million Africans were chained into ships and carried across the ocean to raise crops they would never eat. More of them were spent on sugar than on anything else. Cotton and tobacco are what we tend to remember. Sugar is what consumed them. To see why, step inside the building at the centre of every plantation. The boiling house. It is harvest, and the fires cannot go out. Cut cane sows within a day, so once the grinding starts it does not stop. Not at night. Not for weeks. Inside, the heat is a wall you walk into. A row of copper kettles sits over a furnace, each one smaller than the last, the sugar growing thicker and hotter as it slides down the line. At the end of that line stands the most valuable enslaved man on the estate, the boiler. He reads the molten syrup with an expert's eye, because everything turns on a single instant. Boil it too long and it scorches to waste, too little and it never sets. He waits, ladle in hand, for the exact moment. Then he calls the strike, and the men pour the scalding liquid into the cooling trays before it turns. He is skilled, he is trusted, and it is killing him. The heat swells a man's limbs so badly that workers are dragged off the coppers every few hours before they drop. But the fire is not the worst of it. At the far end of the mill wait the rollers, where the cane is fed in by hand. If a sleeve catches, an arm goes in, and then the shoulder, and then the whole body. So a hatchet hangs on the wall beside the rollers, kept sharp for one purpose: to take the arm off before it takes the person. This is what the sweetness cost. On a sugar estate, an enslaved worker could expect to live about 7 years. 7 years, and still the ships kept coming because the sugar was worth it. By the 1780s, one French colony on the western third of Hispaniola had become the richest patch of ground on earth. They called it Saint-Domingue. It produced close to 40% of all the sugar Europe consumed, and it did that by working 500,000 enslaved people to death and buying more. Cruelty like that has a breaking point. In 1791, the enslaved of Saint-Domingue rose, burned the plantations to the ground, and fought for 13 years against the greatest armies in the world. Napoleon sent a fleet to crush them and take the colony back. It was annihilated, half by the rebels, half by yellow fever. And here the sweetness in your kitchen reached across an ocean and redrew a map. Napoleon had lost the colony that made the sugar worth having. Now he had no use for the enormous mainland territory he was holding to feed it. In 1803, he sold the whole of Louisiana to the United States for a few cents an acre, 800,000 square miles, the entire heart of a continent. The young nation doubled in size overnight. A slave revolt on a sugar island is the reason the map of America looks the way it does. Now hold the whole thing at once and see what sugar really was. We tell ourselves that sugar profited from slavery as though it were a passenger on a ship someone else was sailing. That is backwards. Sugar drove it. The hunger for sweetness built the plantation, and the plantation was something the world had never seen. Not a farm, a factory, a full century before the word existed. In 1985, the anthropologist Sidney Mintz published Sweetness and Power. He argued that the Caribbean sugar estate, with its timed shifts and its production line, and its people reduced to interchangeable parts, was the first modern industrial workplace on Earth, the template the factory age would follow. Decades earlier, in 1944, the historian Eric Williams had published Capitalism and Slavery. He traced how the vast fortunes wrung from sugar, and the people who grew it helped finance the rise of industrial Britain itself. And the sugar did not just pay for the factories, it fed them. A spoonful stirred into hot tea gave a mill worker cheap calories to push through a 14-hour shift, and so the same sweetness that broke bodies in the Caribbean kept bodies running in Britain. Both ends of the trade ran on it. The smoke over Manchester's chimneys did not start in England. It started in a boiling house, at night, with a man watching a copper kettle for the exact moment to strike. He never had a name that survived. Neither did the man in the New Guinea jungle, who first tore open a stalk of cane 8,000 years before him. Between those two men runs the entire history of sugar. From the first accidental sweetness pulled out of the wet ground, to the last of it wrung out of a human life in the dark. One tasted it, and could not have dreamed what it would cost. The other paid the cost, so that a labourer in England could stir it into his tea and think nothing at all. That is the strange arithmetic of the things sitting in your kitchen right now. The sugar in your coffee, your bread, your child's cereal is chemically identical to the crystals an enslaved man died pouring into a cooling tray 2 centuries ago. The same sweetness, with the screaming filtered out. We taste it 100 times a day and feel nothing. That may be the truest measure of how completely sugar won. It made itself invisible. So the next time something is sweet, hold it on your tongue 1 extra second. Remember that it was, for almost all of human history, the rarest taste on earth. And remember that the reason it is no longer rare is written in a ledger almost nobody wants to open.